Glad that you're here for our third conversation around this idea of God, life, and money. So whether you're in the room today or you're joining online, welcome. It's really good that we get a chance to gather and to be together. We say this all the time. I want to say it to you again. Your presence just matters. God did design us to be together and to live life together and to have rallying points. And so your presence is an absolute gift. So thanks so much for being here. I want to dive right into this third part of the conversation of God, life, and money because we've covered some significant ground in the conversation the first 2 weeks. We started with this reality saying, boy, yeah, money's a really big part of life, but could we put things in the right order? And the right order would be to come back to the beginning and understand that God has made you and me as humans with a common purpose that we all collectively share and are a part of. And we can distill that purpose really into three very simple, tangible, clear things that really become, in large part, some of the strongest guide rails in our life, just kind of keeping us in this journey with God, giving us a lot of room to move, but within these guardrails. You and I, we share a common purpose that could just be captured in a few phrases. One, that we're created to be with Him, to be like Him, and then to help others be with Him and like Him. I mean, if you wonder, hey, why are we here? Why are we on the earth? This is why. God created you and me to be with Him and like Him. That was the generous motive of God's original creation of men and women. That was the generous motivation of His heart. And at that point, He said, hey, go multiply and fill the earth. But this thing called sin gets in and really disrupts the first two. So God says, hey, it's not just the first two. Literally, I want you to engage in number 3 with me. To help others be with me and be like me, experience my power in their life, like Miranda just talked about, my presence and my fullness, the power in their life. That's the common purpose that all of us share. It's why every single one of us, God is inviting us to come back to relationship with Him. Because that's why we originally made it. It's like, oh man, I want you to come back to me. And so when we find our way back to God, that's what we're beginning to find is this common purpose. That we're created to be with Him, to be like Him and help others be with Him and like Him. But there's better news than even that. I mean, it continues to get more exciting. Because we don't just have a common purpose, that's what all of us share together, but we also, each and every one of us, you included, we have a unique calling. You have some very unique ways in which you were created to live out that common purpose all of us share. See, God created really good things, meaningful things to get done on the earth, things that would express His heaven on the earth, that would express His nature and glory on the earth. God created those things. And He made some of those things, and then He made you perfectly designed to do those things. God didn't make you and then think, I wonder what we should figure out for that person to do. God made the things and then said, let me make you perfectly for that. That's your unique calling. You bring God-given personality traits and abilities and then supernatural abilities and dreams and points of compassion and awarenesses that other people don't bring. You have a unique calling that fuels this common purpose that all of us share, every single one of us. And the more we can be at home in those two things, the more the rest of life makes sense. The more that the things we encounter, like money and having to get a job and having to have a career. I mean, a career makes much more sense and can be much more satisfying when we see it in light of our purpose and our unique calling. So God says, let me just invite you into this way of living with me. But again, we're still acknowledging money's a really big piece of life, no matter how you look at it. Money it's a big component that we've got to deal with and we've got to understand and we've got to figure out how to live with it. And along the way, the challenge is money is such a big deal that if we're not careful, money, instead of being a tool, money can become a barrier to us actually living our common purpose and our unique calling. Money can feel absolutely essential to us, and yet, listen, money can actually be one of the most significant barriers to you living your unique calling inside of our common purpose. Jesus talked about it a little bit. In fact, if you've got a Bible or you want to grab a phone or something like that, even if you're joining from home today, maybe you just grab a phone and go to the book of Luke. It's a letter, New Testament of your Bible. And Luke is written by a guy named, just hang on for this. Luke is written by a guy named Luke, okay? It's super creatively named. Luke is written by a guy named Luke, and Luke is writing to a friend of his, and what he's trying to do in the letter is he's trying to explain who Jesus really was. He's trying to help his friend see, wait, this is the Jesus I've encountered. This is the Jesus that I have been with. This is the Jesus I've listened to other people talk about as well. I want you to meet that Jesus. Luke wrote a letter literally trying to help another person be with God and like God. Okay? And then Luke actually went on to write another letter that you have in the New Testament Bible. It's called Acts. It's like post the resurrection. It's post-Easter. And it's what the early followers of Jesus do and how they live in really the power and the presence of the Spirit of God living in them. And Luke writes another letter to this same friend trying to say, see, this is what we're talking about. In the middle of Luke, we find all sorts of things that you would expect in the life of Jesus. We find some miracles. We find some healings. We find Jesus like working closely with a really tight band of followers and then some broader groups as well. We see him some really meaningful teachings where he's trying to just help the people of the day understand this kingdom, this way of living he's trying to bring to the earth, right? And in the middle of that, in Luke chapter 12, it's almost like we find what could look like an interruption into what Jesus is doing, like an interruption into Jesus' busy schedule, his teaching schedule, his healing schedule. A guy kind of interrupts Jesus in the middle of this crowd, and this is what we find, Luke chapter 12. We're going to start reading verse 13. Someone in the crowd just kind of yells out to him at this pause in the moment and says, hey, teacher, Jesus, could you tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me? It's super interesting. Like, that's such an ancient problem, right? Divide the inheritance with me. It's really tragically still a very current problem. I mean, how often do you hear the story? Maybe you've even been a part of it, of where one generation passes away and the next generation finds themselves in a dispute over who's going to get what, who's going to take how much. And it really oftentimes has nothing to do with quantity. It's just stuff and it's memories, and sometimes it becomes about leverage and power, and right? Jesus is talking about an ancient problem that's also still a current problem. The guy interrupts with this question about that kind of problem. And Jesus replies, as Jesus often does. I love this. Jesus says, hey, you got a question? I got a question. Man, who appointed me to be judge or arbiter between you and your brother? And then he said to them, so Jesus answers the guy's question with a question, and then he looks away from the guy and he looks back at the whole crowd. Right now he's going to teach everybody that's around. So he looks back at them and he says, hey, everybody, watch out. Jesus starts waving a warning flag here. Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, because life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Your life isn't made by what you can put your hands on. Your life isn't completed by your stuff. And so then he tells them the story to help it gain some traction in their life. He says, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, man, what am I going to do? I don't even have any place to store all of this. My bank doesn't allow me to put this much money in. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I'm going to tear down my barns, and I'm going to build bigger ones. And there I'm going to store my surplus grain, and I'm going to say to myself, you got plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and just be merry. Have a good time. But then God said to him, man, you didn't live very wise here. You fool. This very night, your life's actually going to end. And then who's going to get what you prepared for yourself? Who's going to deal with your inheritance? Who's going to deal with all your stuff? This is how it will be for everyone who stores up things for themselves but is not rich towards God, who isn't generous back towards God, who isn't loving back towards God, who isn't yielded back towards God. Like Jesus saying, this is the problem that we find ourselves in. I want to go back to verse 15 because there's this warning statement in here with Jesus, and this is what he says, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Be on your guard. Let's just talk about warnings with Jesus for a minute. Like Jesus, anytime Jesus is waving the caution flag, the warning flag, it's helpful for us to come back and just say, why would Jesus do it? It's helpful for us to come back to Jesus' motives. Jesus' motives are always going to be for you and for your life. So what Jesus is trying to do, he's trying to wave a flag and say, hey, look. Over here, I want to highlight something that's trying to steal, kill, and destroy parts of your life. Oftentimes very gradually, very subtly, and in sneaky ways. So watch out, like look out for that. And I want you to be on guard. And he uses a word that would have been what the people of the day would have understood to have been the soldier up in the tower at the city entrance, watching out on the horizon, watching for the enemy to come and sounding the alarm when the enemy is spotted. Jesus says, look, like be on guard, guard your own life, and do it against all kinds of greed. All kinds of greed. Now, look, I get it. I get it. Most of us would say, man, I don't really have enough to be greedy with. Like I'm not greedy. I mean, I give and I do all these things. What's funny is Jesus said that. Jesus made this little point and then he told this little story to a bunch of people who a really significant percentage, if not all of them, would have been day-to-day people. These people would have been living day to day. These were people in a society, in a culture where they're catching fish for the day. You know what I mean? They're growing the harvest for one season. Jesus isn't talking to people with millions in the bank. In fact, in the grand scheme, Jesus is probably talking to people with less than most of us. And yet he still warns them, like, just be careful. Just be careful of this very tricky, sticky thing called greed. Greed, this thing where we say, man, I always want more. And I always want more because what I really hope the more will do is I really hope eventually if I get enough, then somehow, man, I will just be content. That enough will make me content. That enough will make me settled. Or I want to get enough to actually prove I'm worth it, that I'm worthy, that I've got a place in society, that I'm significant and that I matter. Or that I've built a large enough kind of wall of protection around me. Man, financial ruin could have no place in me. Greed is when we want more for those kinds of purposes. Greed is really just always wishing we have something we don't. This may not be you. This may not be you. Maybe it's just me. So I'll just confess for a moment. It takes me about a nanosecond to recognize that I have greed in my life. There are some things that if I'm not careful every day, I wish I had some of that. Okay? Now again, you're way more holy than me and I get that. That's probably not you, but it is me. Okay, so let's talk about me for the next couple minutes. All right? Jesus says, be on guard. Like, just look at me waving my arms. Be on guard against that greed. Don't get trapped in that. But how do we do it? Like, how do we take greed and like remove it when it's in our life? And how do we take greed and notice it before more of it gets in our life? Again, because the only thing Jesus is trying to do is he's trying to say, I love you so much. I'm so for you. That I don't want little pesky things robbing and stealing and killing your life. So what I want to do is I want to help you see what those things are before they get there. So how can you and I be people who would live on guard against greed? How could we push it away? How could we prop up some barriers to greed before greed becomes a barrier to us living in our unique calling and our common purpose? To see the first part, flip in your Bibles, or maybe you'll scroll back on your phone or something. Philippians, a little letter written by a guy named Paul with an unbelievable life of both triumph and tragedy. I mean, some successes, but just unbelievable trauma. He was shipwrecked multiple times, beat multiple times, in and out of prison multiple times, ended up being martyred for his faith, used to kill Jesus' followers, and then has this dynamic encounter with Jesus, now starting to help people meet Jesus and be like Jesus, right? I mean, Paul's got this crazy, crazy life. And sometimes has everything he needs, and sometimes has more than he needs, and sometimes has nothing. Doesn't have any of what he needs. Like Paul's got the whole spectrum, and honestly, his fairly brief life. And he writes this letter, Philippians, from jail, and he's trying to encourage some people. And this is what he says, Philippians chapter 4. We're going to start reading actually in the middle of verse 12. This is what he says. He says, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether I'm well-fed, whether I have plenty, or whether I am hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And then verse 13, you might have quoted this verse at some point. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. It is quotable. Right? It is quotable. And it is true. It is a promise. I mean, it is quotable. We can make it through a hard time through Christ who gives us strength. We can do well in an interview or in a tryout, or we can navigate a relationship through Christ who gives us strength. But I think it's interesting that Paul wrote it when he was talking about learning to be content. I don't know if I've ever quoted the verse about contentment in my life. You? Again, I know you're far more holy than me, so we're talking about me here for a little bit today, but I've learned to be content. That was a tough one, but what I've learned while being content is that I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength, including I can learn to be content. Whether I have plenty or whether I have nothing. Either side of that. See, this first way that you and I could be people who could push against greed, and then we could notice it when it's coming, is we could be people who learn contentment. We could learn to be satisfied to the point of not being disturbed. We could learn contentment. We could learn to be satisfied to the point of which we can't be disturbed. We are not shakeable internally by what we have or what we don't have. We can learn contentment. We can learn it. To be satisfied, settled internally, beyond the point of being disturbed. But here's this thing, right? I mean, contentment sounds like a good word and sounds appealing, right? We need contentment. We could probably use more contentment. But the bigger word there is learn. Paul did learn. In fact, just say this. Just say the word learn with me. Just say learn. Learn. Well, I could learn to be content. How would I do it, though? A couple ways. The first one is just practice gratefulness. Just practice gratefulness. Just say, look, what am I going to be grateful for that I already have in my life? With money, with job, with opportunity, with friendships, with things. What am I going to be grateful for? I'm often struck by how calming gratefulness can be. How when pressure mounts, or stress comes in, or uncertainty grows, I'm just struck by how calming gratefulness can be to the soul. About some of the simplest things, right? I was thinking about even just this weekend, our family of four, the Allen four, plus one of our girls' friends who's with us a lot. I mean, it does really feel like the Allen five when she's around. We got a chance. We went to a movie on Friday night. And in my opinion, it was a very average movie. My family probably thought it was amazing, and I'll have to watch it again someday. I thought it was average. Okay? But here's the, when we left, I just found myself just really grateful for this simple opportunity, this simple moment. The simple moment of sitting in this thing and looking down the row, and my daughter's sitting next to me, and daughter Mackenzie next to her, and Kenzie's friend next to her, and Erica down. I just grateful for the simplest of things. And it really can be calming, almost soothing to the soul. Gratefulness, the practice of greatness is what you have. I mean, even now, what are you grateful for? Even in this moment, what rushes to your mind or to the front of your heart? You say, what am I grateful for even today? Even today. The second piece, though, to actually learn contentment and growth is to then practice celebration. Practicing gratefulness is about what you have. Practicing celebration is about what other people get. Right? Again, this is probably not true of you, but this is true of me. Celebration is sometimes harder than gratefulness. Sometimes it's just flat out harder to celebrate what somebody else got or has, which is usually pointing an enormous arrow towards the greed in my heart. Right? It's like that there, right there. Well, how do you get it? We just practice. We develop the choice. We learn the Christ-given strength. We learn, because we can do all things through Christ who gives us strength, we learn to celebrate other people's opportunities that we wanted, other people's resources that we wish we had, other people's dollar amounts that we think aren't even fair or justified or they don't deserve for whatever reason that in our mind we think that. We learn to celebrate what other people have. And those two together, that gratefulness and that celebration, they start to build this muscle of contentment until it becomes just the reflex for us. I mean, that's Paul. Paul, of all people, could have looked at a bunch of other people. I mean, Paul's like, man, I'm as devoted to Jesus as anybody. Why am I the one in prison? Why am I the one getting beaten? Why am I going to eventually give my life for this thing? He learned the contentment. Now, learn contentment, it does feel like more of a heart-shaped thing, right? Like let something cultivate around in the soul. Let a soul expression grow. And we got to think about it, be mindful, practice some gratefulness, write down some things that we're going to celebrate, send notes to people we're celebrating their good that we wanted or wish we could have, right? Let's talk about one more thing that maybe starts a little more practical, but then kind of pulls the heart along with it. If we want to push against greed, it's one thing to learn contentment. But then there's this other thing called, like, live with a budget. Live with a budget. Now, again, I know you're like how obvious is that? But let's be clear. It's not very common. Can we just agree with it? It's not very common. You see, because you and I, like, we're invited constantly to spend more than we make and spend more than we have. It's everywhere, right? There's a lot of people and organizations and groups that want to tell you what you should have or could have or deserve. I remember when Eric and I were first married, or when we first bought our first house in Roanoke, Virginia. It was on a road where oftentimes when we turned onto it, we would pass this little bank that was on the corner of this main road. And this little bank, for the longest time, I'll never forget it. It was right after we'd moved in. For the longest time, this bank had a big sign, kind of their big marquee sign out by the road. For the longest time, it said, "You deserve a bigger home." And I'll never forget, even at that point in my life, every day driving by that and thinking, how do they know that about me? I don't even bank here. Right? But it's kind of what people tell us, right? Everybody wants us to get a little bit of our money, and so right, there's this pressure. We don't have great modeling of living in a budget. I don't really know if you guys have noticed this or seen this, but we don't really have a government that can live in a budget, right? And don't email me because it's both parties, okay, right? So, okay, it's like, but we just don't, right? And yet there's this thing of, we just have a tendency to spend more than we make. Several years ago, there was a stat that said that the average American household spends 113% of what they make. You do the math real quick. Do you see I mean, there's a challenge in this, right? So we could live in a budget, and there's all sorts of ways that we could do that. We could find some helpful things, maybe some helpful tools to do that. In fact, maybe for you, if you're looking for kind of a jump start to this thing, maybe this idea would be helpful. Go ahead and take a look at this.
Have you ever found yourself regretting financial decisions? Maybe you've been in on the other end of a late-night infomercial purchase. Maybe you feel you could use more wisdom in your finances.
It was late, and it was cold, and I thought I could use one of those, so I bought 3.
Have you ever felt a sense of shame after purchasing a nonsensical item?
In the moment, it seemed like the right thing to do.
What if I told you there was a way to prevent making stupid purchases?
Tell me more.
Introducing the Spendex app. It's simple. Download the app, link it to your bank account, and when you attempt to purchase nonsensical items that are outside of your budget, it simply emits a large shock to your nervous system.
Wait, what?
That's right. Every bad purchasing decision is now followed by 50,000 volts pulsating through your body. You'll think twice before buying those gravity boots or Chia Pet. There are so many features on the Spendex app. You can select a preventative method that works best for you. There's the shocking method, the screeching alarm, the public humiliation alert. That's my favorite. And in the latest update, you'll get the burning feature, where your phone heats up to 237 degrees Fahrenheit. It'll burn real bad.
Thanks to Spendex, now I'm debt-free.
So what are you waiting for? For 17 easy payments of $24.99, the Spendex app is yours.
So spend less with Spendex. Oh, it was just on vibrate.
I have no idea how to redeem that. Yeah. Sometimes it feels like we need something extreme with the budget, right? But what if you and I could just take a really simple step? So let me just play out for us the most, the basic, the perfect, maybe starting point budget for so many of us, just to say, oh, wait, maybe this is the tool. Maybe this would be a way that could help me make some pre-decisions before money is actually in my hand. We could live with a budget, something like this, where we just said, hey, the first 10%, I'm going to give it. The second 10%, I'm going to save it. And the other 80%, that's what I'm going to live on. That's what's gonna like help my life take shape. That's how I'm gonna like pay bills and all those kind of things. Maybe just play this out. Now it's one thing to look at it like at a pie chart or whatever else, but let's play it out a little bit differently. If you and I just said, what does it look like to take the budget and everything that we get, every dollar that comes in our hand, whether we get a paycheck from that job, which we really do we want to get, or whether we get a gift or somebody gives us a birthday gift or a Christmas gift, or you get a bonus at work or whatever it is, like what do we do? What if we just said from the very beginning, hey, whenever the money shows up, and like these little M&Ms, whenever it shows up, the first 10%, I'm already going to have made the decision that I'm going to give that. I mean, that's kind of a principle that God has invited us into, just to give him the first. And really what's kind of interesting about this give the first 10% back to God, it's really kind of interesting because God actually already owns it. I mean, we don't really give the first 10%. We actually return it back to him. It's actually his. And then God says, hey, return that back to me. I'm actually giving you the other 90. Just return the first 10 to me, because that's just a way of us being in relationship together. It's a way of you acknowledging that you rely on me for the best management of this, the best stewardship of this. Just hand this 10% back to me. So God sets up this pattern by which we do that. He calls it the tithe, where he says, hey, it's the first 10, and take it into what he calls in the scriptures the storehouse, or your expression of the local church, bringing his kingdom to the earth. That's God's idea. And so we just say, before the money hits my hand, whether it's from a paycheck or a gift or whatever, I've already decided I'm going to give the first 10%, the first dollar out of every $10, I'm going to give that right there. And the second 10 is I'm going to give that to save whatever, the next 10%. I'm going to start saving. If I don't have one, I'm going to start building some type of emergency fund. I'm going to build that up a little bit. I'm going to build a little buffer. I'm going to try and have myself ready for a crisis when something breaks, because it always does. And then I'm going to think long. Like I am going to think about 50, 60, 70 years of my life and what that looks like. I'm just going to try and have a plan. That's the second 10% of every dollar that comes in, no matter how I get that dollar. Unless you get it by stealing and then it just needs to go back, okay? But if you earn it or it's a gift to you or whatever, this is where we go. And then God says, and then take the next 80%, like just take all of that. And you just live. This is how you're going to put gas in the car. This is how you're going to buy food and groceries. This is how you're going to pay your bills. This is how you're going to have some entertainment in your life, if that matters to you. But you're going to make this decision to just keep putting it in. You're going to watch the 80%, which at the end of the day is really significant when just compared to that 10% and that 10%. You just keep rolling it in. And what eventually happens, if you live on this long enough, what you begin to find is that in the 80%, you find some margin. You actually live in this long enough that in 80%, you get the wisdom of Jesus. He helps you shape this thing, and you get some margin. And so then you can like give more away. You can do different things with it, right? You can start to save a little bit more. Now, look, if you're here today and you're 25 or you're 26, you got a really good paying job, and you live at home, this is not your budget. Okay, you should be like, in this one, it should be like 40% or something, right? I mean, it's saving long, right? And you figure, oh, wait, where would I give more? Where would I give beyond my tithe? I want to honor God in this. Where do I give? Where do I give beyond that? And see, here's what happens. When we do this, we make this decision before the money's in our hand. And when we make the decision before the money's in our hand, when the money is in our hand, we've already taken some of the emotion out of the equation. We've already given ourselves a chance to stop greed before it gets any traction. We see, these are the decisions I'm going to make. And listen, when we do this, when we give the first 10 here, and we give the second 10 here, and we're kind of giving the last 80 here, can I tell you what we do? When we decide to do it this way, here's what happens. When we decide to do it this way, we can build a budget that allows money to go towards fueling our common purpose and our unique calling. Instead of always like just spending whatever it is and then knowing some good that God has invited us to do, or knowing opportunities to grow and learn and be discipled, be educated in that good to do, and looking and saying, yeah, but I don't have any money for that. But when we begin to rest in this common purpose, when we begin to become more at home and understanding our unique calling, we say, look, with the money that comes in, let me spend my money on purpose and towards that calling, because that's why God actually has me here. Let money serve my life's purpose instead of my life's purpose trying to serve my money. When we start with the budget, yeah, there's some wisdom and there's some planning and there's some value in that, but it actually sets us up to start to put the conversation in the right order. What's this common purpose we share? What's my unique calling? And how can I do that? How can I honor the God who has invited me back into relationship with him? How can I save, not just for a comfortable retirement, not just to put barriers around it, but how can I also save thinking that, you know what, even when I'm 80, I'm still going to have a calling? I want to prepare for that. How can I right now pay all my bills and do some things and pay off debt? But how can I also be budgeting? Where is the margin, no matter how small, to say I'm going to put this towards making sure I'm living in this common purpose and this unique calling? Look, listen, can I just plead with you for a minute? If you're 12 or you're 14 or you're 16 or you're 18, if you start this now, you have such a head start on the rest of us. You start now. If you're 75 and never done it and you feel the pressure, just start now. The best time to start is always right now. Now look, there are other ways to pull this thing off. We can do some things wishing that it'll all just come together, and wishing that we'll just have all these resources, and wishing that kind of in one fell swoop we can be really wealthy or independently wealthy, or we can kind of hope that something just drops in our lap or whatever. We can kind of hope that. Any of you familiar with the name Anna Edson Taylor? Ring a bell for anybody? I mean, Anna Edson Taylor was actually like a gal who was actually originally from Michigan, was a school teacher. When she was widowed, she decided she needed some funds, and so she decided the way she was going to get some funds was she was going to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel with her cat. Because she thought that if I could go over Niagara Falls in a barrel and survive, which nobody had done at that point, I'll be famous, maybe, and I'll have a fortune, maybe. Well, Anna Edson Taylor, 1901, she did it. The picture that you're looking at right now is some people trying to pull her out of the barrel that she made it over with. She got to the end of this thing, she only had one scratch on her. It was a scratch on her forehead that she actually got when they were pulling her out of the barrel. Okay? So she got a little bit of fame for a little bit. There was a season of time where people wanted to know that story and wanted to know kind of what motivated her to do that. Didn't get a fortune. And in fact, died several years later, still poor and destitute. And it's interesting, it's almost comical. And yet I wonder how many of us just put ourselves in the barrel and throw ourselves over Niagara Falls thinking, hey, if I could get it, this will be the thing that makes me a fortune. This will be the thing, or that will be the person, or if this would just come my way, or if I pick just the right thing, then what if the way that Jesus invites us is, hey, let's learn contentment. And then let me invite you into a relationship with me where together you're learning how to steward the money that's actually already mine. You're learning to live as a manager of money that's already mine. Learn contentment. Live with a budget. And in doing it, is maybe we'd find ourselves heeding Jesus' warning. Look out, watch for the greed. Watch for the greed. It's tricky. And boy, once it's in there, it's sticky. So watch for the greed. Push against the greed. Learning contentment and living with a budget. Let me ask you this, where are you, today? On a scale of contentment and a scale of living in a budget, where are you? Maybe never started. Maybe you used to feel content. Maybe you aren't experiencing any contentment right now. And maybe you're realizing that even in this season of life, maybe 2020 has been a reminder to you, boy, my contentment's based too much in what I get to do and how I am and how people know me for what I do, and I've just kind of lost what I thought was contentment. Where are you just at on the scale? Where are you at on a budget? Maybe you've never budgeted. Maybe you used to budget. Maybe you partially budget. Maybe you budget the first 40% and leave the last 60 to chance. I mean, where are you at? And just what's one step forward? What's one step? Who's the person you need to have a conversation with about that? A spouse, a financial planner, somebody to help you. Just what's the one step that you could take? Because again, here's the thing. Listen, the motive of Jesus is always about your life. It's always about you and the full life he came to bring. So the warning of Jesus should at least get our attention. See, there's a thing out there that's really subtle that might be just picking at my life gradually. And if I could learn contentment and live in a budget, I might be able to remedy that. Because I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Let's pray about it just for a minute. Lord Jesus, thanks for that you are a warning kind of Jesus, that you would love us enough to give a warning. I think about all the times that, as a dad, that my girls might have been like riding into the road or heading towards something. And I would yell. I would yell out their name. I would yell, like trying to wave the warning flag. In passages like this, I just sense you doing that for us. You're not trying to ruin our fun. You're not trying to damage anything. You're actually trying to help our life. You're trying to help our joy in you. You're trying to help the good experience of life we can have. And I'm grateful for that. I pray that every one of us, we would really hear your compassionate, earnest tone in this morning. And may we sense your direction and your leading. And whatever our next move might be, maybe it is to just this week, be people who would practice gratefulness and practice celebration. Maybe it is even before today is done to say, how am I going to budget? I got to try this thing. We trust your direction. We trust your leadership. Holy Spirit, we trust your wisdom and your prompting. So we give ourselves to you. We're heeding the warning and trusting in you. In Jesus' name. Amen, everybody.